Hi there, this is John Grant from the Agile Attorney Network, and I wanted to create this quick PSA here regarding what I see as a big potential problem with the courts in light of the coronavirus pandemic. There's a lot of uncertainties around the current pandemic, and I don't want to minimize the urgent needs around health and safety that are very much on the front lines. But for the legal industry, I can make a prediction that I'm pretty darn sure about, and that's that the court system in the United States is about to get gridlocked. Here's why. First off, I think it's safe to say that the courts are about to get flooded with new demand. The cases that the courts already have in progress can't close because they've mostly been stayed for weeks or months, but the inputs haven't been turned off because new cases continue to get filed, electronically or otherwise. And again, I think it's safe to say that we're about to enter a period where the potential for new cases is really, really high. This is a scary headline from earlier in the week. Some economists are predicting that at least half of American jobs could be impacted by the pandemic. Now, I don't think it's too outlandish to predict that the economic fallout from this could easily mean that half of all contracts in America are about to get breached. Now, not all of them will wind up in court disputes, but as you'll see in a minute, even a small uptick in an already overburdened court system can have a huge effect on processing time. Just think about the family courts alone. If half of all Americans with a current support obligation has a significant change in income, either they're going to miss a payment, which would cause their ex to file with the courts for an enforcement order, or maybe they'll be proactive, in which case they'll file with the courts for modification. Either way, that is a lot of new filings, and it doesn't include new dissolutions or separations. And there's a formula called Little's Law from the manufacturing industry that tells us what happens to cycle time when demand goes up while processing speed stays flat. What it says is that your cycle time, that is, the amount of time it takes to process an order for work from beginning to end, is a function of the amount of work you have in progress in your system divided by the speed at which you can process the work. And a quick aside here to note that WIP is any kind of work in progress. Some lawyers use a narrow definition of WIP to mean work that you've completed but you haven't billed for yet. And that's a kind of WIP, but it is far from the only kind. For courts, WIP is any case that has been filed but not yet closed, which means that the court has to expend its finite resources tracking and processing that work. Now, the first thing everyone thinks about when they learn about Little's Law is that if you can just speed up your delivery time, then you can reduce your cycle time. And mathematically, that is true. But trying to speed up throughput rate is kind of like turning up the dial on your treadmill. You can maybe do it for a short burst, but you're going to get exhausted pretty quickly. Or you can put a lot of effort into training and conditioning so you make some incremental gains that will be more sustainable. But that isn't exactly something you can do overnight. So thinking about this in terms of a court's workload, if we assume that the court's throughput rate is going to be roughly flat, but the number of active cases that they have on their dockets is going to grow, then it's easy to see that the cycle time, meaning the time it takes to resolve a case, is going to go up. But I have more bad news. That assumption that throughput rate is going to stay flat probably isn't a good one. The reason why comes from a branch of mathematics called queuing theory, which is effectively the study of lines. It's pretty esoteric, and I don't want to exaggerate my own understanding of it, but the field of study is actually pretty robust. It's most typically applied in two types of settings. The first is in places where the queues are people, like banks or stores or amusement parks. The other is when the queues are computer data, like you have with processors, switches, and routers. Queuing theory looks at throughput time, which is the total amount of time it takes to deliver a unit, whatever your unit happens to be. That throughput time is the sum total of both the amount of time the customer has to wait for a producer to start working on your unit after they put in an order, plus the amount of time the producer spends actually creating that unit. So even assuming that the amount of time it takes a producer to complete a piece of work is constant, which, as you'll see in a minute, is not the case, the wait time, of course, is not constant. The more demand there is in the queue, the longer the wait time will be, which means the total throughput time will get longer as well. But the queuing theory formula is actually a little more complicated. In addition to the work time, it takes into account the utilization rate of the resources that produce the unit of work. As shown here, the total response time is equal to the work time divided by 1 minus the utilization rate. I know, lawyer math, but here's a graph of that formula. I'll walk you through what this is telling us. Here on the left, where utilization is low, meaning the resource isn't at all busy, then the response time is the same as the working time. It's just a multiplier of 1. If we get utilization rate up to 50%, then the response time is going to be twice as long as the working time. Not too bad. But if you're looking further to the right, you'll see a troubling trend. Once your utilization rate hits 75%, your response time is quadruple your working time, and it grows logarithmically. Another 5% utilization gets you to 80, but now your response time is 5 times your working time. Get up to 90% utilization, and your response time balloons to 10x your working time. Talk about diminishing returns. The place where we see this most often in the real world is with car traffic, where a highway can be moving along at a decent clip, but the addition of just a few cars can bring it to total gridlock. I'll have to look for some data to see exactly where court resources lie on this utilization scale, but I'm pretty certain it falls somewhere on the right-hand side of the graph. So I'm going to switch back to Little's law here in a second, but before I do, I just want to clarify that throughput rate for purposes of Little's law is inversely proportional to throughput time from queuing theory. So as throughput time goes up with higher utilization, throughput rate goes down. Which means that not only is the numerator of this equation likely to grow, as I showed you a minute ago, the denominator is likely to shrink at the same time, which means that cycle time is going to get even worse because both parts of the fraction will be driving it up. And unfortunately, this can be a bad kind of spiral, since slower throughputs are likely to cause the queues to grow, which will drive utilization of resources upward as well. So I have some ideas for how to mitigate the problem, but I'm going to have to get to those in future videos. For now, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, or sign up for my newsletter at agileattorney.com to learn more and get informed. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.